Hi, I'm LadyJenevia. Today's video is a spoiler review of the Dickinson Season 3 premiere. The first 3 episodes of the final season are now available for streaming on Apple TV, and presumably if you're watching this, you've already watched them. I know I didn't do a spoiler-free review of the premiere, but I had midterms last week, and there were just certain plot spoilers from the premiere that journalists who pay attention to instructions would not have been able to discuss ahead of the premiere anyway. But worry not if you're wanting the spoiler-free reviews of the upcoming episodes the way I did for Season 2. I will be working on those in between my coursework. As a matter of fact, my spoiler-free review for Episode 4 should be up and available sometime shortly after this video goes live. Before we jump into discussing each of these first 3 episodes, I feel like we should address the elephant in the room. Apparently there were some things that have been leaked, or at least that's what people on Twitter have been telling me. Here is my obligatory reminder that if you don't follow me on Twitter, I will not see your tweets in my notifications if you're wanting me to see them anyway. It's the setting I have for my account as a precautionary noise reduction measure. Anyway, apparently certain outlets and certain talent have been revealing things about the upcoming final season. I will not be stating the specifics of what I was told on Twitter have been leaked, but if you're really desperate to find out, it's probably floating around somewhere on the Bird app. If you are wanting me to confirm or deny what was stated or elaborate on any of those so-called leaks, I will respectfully state that I'm not going to confirm or deny anything until it airs. However, I was asked by either someone in my YouTube comments or perhaps it was on Twitter if I could share what plot spoilers have been kept under embargo until they air. Seeing as how the first 3 episodes of Season 3 have aired, I don't see any harm in sharing what from those episodes were things people with access to press screeners were not supposed to share. Starting with Episode 1, reviewers and journalists were not supposed to share that the funeral at the beginning of the first episode was Aunt Lavinia's, the fact that Sue was pregnant, which I think was one of the things that had been leaked ahead of the premiere, and the fact that Mr. Dickinson had a heart attack and has survived that heart attack. If you watched my very vague Season 3 review that I published on November 1st, you may recall that I said that there were things in Sue's story this season that people were not supposed to share, but that after the premiere aired that I would be able to talk more about her. Now you can see why I just skipped saying too much about her. I don't think any of the most avid fans of the series would be surprised by the fact that Sue would have pregnancy and childbirth be part of her Season 3 story. Emily Dickinson, her immediate family members, Sue Gilbert, all of these people were real people. Although the show takes this more anachronistic approach to telling their stories in a reimagined way, there is a certain amount of reference to the historical source material, and anyone can quickly Google Sue Gilbert and find out that Austin Dickinson and Sue Gilbert in real life did have children together. Since I really didn't get to say much about her in my general Season 3 review, I can add a little bit more feedback about Sue's Season 3 arc now that you know that she got pregnant and had a baby. Also, when I wrote that review, no trailer had been released yet. I hinted in my Season 3 review about how Sue would be more expressive this season, whereas in the past 2 seasons, she has had to keep a lot of things contained because it's the 1800s. Since you all were able to see that Season 3 trailer, Sue saying that line to Emily about wanting the mess, which I'm not going to lie, I was kind of surprised that they revealed that in the promo. I feel like it's safe enough now to say that Sue does express more of her feelings to Emily, about Emily. If she's happy or sad or any other emotions for that matter, her name is Sue Gilbert and she has something to say. I think it's pretty standard for romances in the 1800s to have that repressed yearning, but it's Season 3, it's the last hurrah. If ever there was a time to let people speak up, it's now. The spoilers for Episode 2 that were not supposed to be shared ahead of them airing was the fact that Sue gave birth to her first child, and the fact that Jane Humphrey leaves Amherst and Austin. Then, perhaps surprisingly, I don't know, there weren't any specific spoilers listed for Episode 3 that were being explicitly forbidden from being shared, so make of that what you will. Now let's just jump into things episodically and we can talk about things more in depth. Episode 1, Hope is the Thing with Feathers. I was pleasantly surprised that death showed up this quickly, but in the grand scheme of things, it makes sense. The whole season is trying to address not only the Civil War, but the concept of war and death in general. That's why season 3 opens with a funeral. That's why Lavinia is having this breakdown over her exes. That's why all of these women are trying to get black dresses made, and that is why death waited exactly 3 seconds after the funeral to show up. I don't feel great about the idea of death being depressed on the show by the repetitive nature of war. This is when we start to get into my mixed feelings about the way the show addresses the topic of war. So death as a character on this show is one that you can interpret in a number of ways. He could be the manifestation of Emily's propensity for morbidity, which would mean his perspective is shaped by her worldview. However, this is not the show's only brush with the supernatural. They had that seance happen in season 2, and death was not present in that scene, which would suggest that death is supposed to be a character that exists independently of Emily. When we see death, he is shown to be depressed by what he considers to be the repetitive nature of war. Did we miss the part where war has been waged for all of human history? The very first sentence of the very first section of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels' pamphlet states, "The history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles." So, war has been extremely pervasive in human history because of selfish, unfiltered greed. People want to steal land, resources, and money, and profit off of other people's labor. Why would the Civil War be so drastic a shift in the amount of deaths the character of Death had to deal with? There's a world of billions of people alive, and loads of other wars he would have presumably already had experience dealing with. Am I getting long-winded and tangential about this? Perhaps. But what did you click on this review for if not for me to get long-winded and tangential about the material of Dickinson season 3? And we're still only in episode 1. As far as this exchange with Death goes, and shifting the focus back onto Emily now, she says a line to Death about how she believes poetry can be more powerful than death, which in the context of the show makes sense to me. I interpreted it as this recurring acknowledgement of art being a means of achieving immortality. By being a great artist, your art lives on and continues to impact people even after your death, as evidenced by the fact that it's 2021 and we're still talking about Emily Dickinson, a poet who lived and died in the 1800s. She also says a line about how death can pull people apart and poetry can put them back together again. This is more or less a thesis statement for the entire season. You have war waging that's tearing people apart on a grand scale, and Emily wants to expand her poetic efforts in such a way that it can try to help bring people back together. I wouldn't say that this is a concept that works in too literal a sense, but it's a sufficient allegory for art being something that people can bond over even if they're from different backgrounds. Jumping ahead to the Dickinson home now, I took notes when I was watching the season for the first time, and let me tell you, the first time I saw Maggie again back on the job, I immediately thought about how when the season 2 finale finally aired, and all that mayhem kicked off on Twitter, I saw a tweet saying something like, "Where was Maggie while all of that was happening in the Dickinson home?" I think the answer to that question is minding her own business like a good ally. Let's talk about some of the other characters in the ensemble now. Austin's story this season. I don't really know how to feel about his specific character journey, especially when we look at his run on the entire show, because I look back on how lovely that moment was between him and Emily, where he's really loving and supportive of her, even if life is pretty disastrous at that point. And that just showed how far he had come as a character, and now all of a sudden he's back to being a mess. And I want to know why. What happened? It feels like something happened between season 2 and season 3 that we're not privy to, and I don't know if it's a spoiler to say this, but they don't really reveal some major, oh, here's some really traumatic incident that happened off screen that is going to explain why he's virtually unrecognizable at the start of season 3. So Austin and Jane have been having an affair, but I can't really be upset about that, considering that Emily and Sue, if we're going to be technical, are also having an affair. I mean, fair is fair. If Sue isn't all in on her marriage, I don't see why Austin should be either. But anyway, he's just being very messy with it, the drinking and the apparent womanizing. I mean, that's what his father said, but I don't know if he's actually womanizing, because as far as everything that we see in the show, the only woman that he's really interested in is Jane, but that's neither here nor there. It's also probably not the best thing to be doing when your wife is fully pregnant, as in she's about 10 minutes away from giving birth. It's very peculiar to me that we've now hit the point where Mr. Dickinson is somehow being more reasonable than Austin. Since when? I guess part of me wishes there was that explanation of how he got to this point, because it was a jarring reintroduction to him. It's not like I had much of a choice though, that's simply where he's at now, so I had to accept it and just get on with the season. I will admit though, when he said, "I don't even know if that baby's mine," my reaction was to go, ooh, because I love drama when it's fictional. That's when I knew we were going to have mess this season. And I'm here for it. I'm here to watch it. Lavinia's arc this season, as I said in my previous review, is not as much fun to watch as it was in season 2. It's just that bar was set really high, and I don't know all of the mechanisms of the writing process for this season and mapping everything out for all of the different characters. Maybe they felt like doing a more compelling, interesting arc for Lavinia would have taken too much runtime away from Henry's storyline, and if that was the case, I don't know if it was, I would be fine with it, because I really enjoyed Henry's material and the ensemble of characters in his orbit, which we don't get to see quite as much of in these first 3 episodes, but they will start to build more on that in the remainder of the season. I did, however, enjoy Lavinia's line where she says something like, "Do you guys realize every boy I've ever kissed is dead?" To which I say, okay, now you're just showing off. Also, her cat is so ridiculously cute. When they said she had a bunch of cats though, I was very disappointed by the fact that we didn't actually get to see a bunch of cats. Where is the supplemental web series released alongside the Dickinson episodes of just all of Lavinia's cats living their lives and vibing as cats do? This season doesn't have nearly enough cat content. I'm really sorry to be critical, but you know, there we have it. You name dropped the cats, you got my hopes up, and then you didn't follow through. Show me the cats. I don't have too much to say about the Dickinson parents in episode 1. It was admittedly ridiculous when Mrs. Dickinson said, "It is a woman's job to make sure everybody else is happy at all times, no matter the cost." I'm sorry, but that simply doesn't apply to men. Jane Krakowski is way too good at delivering boomer energy. Jumping over to Emily and Sue now, but let's start with Emily. That proposal scene was so funny to me. I was entirely unprepared for how much delight I would get out of Mr. Conkey bringing a small cushion just for his knee. You have to respect that he came prepared. I'm sure it was refreshing for fans that the show didn't make anyone wait for Emily and Sue to admit and act on their feelings for one another. Lines like, "I only love you," "This baby's going to love you," "I wish this baby was yours," and of course, let us not forget the other line, "Why can't a baby have 2 mothers?" They can, and they do. Take it away, Billy Eichner.
Let's go, lesbians! Let's go, lesbians! Rounding the corner with a bunch of lesbians! Here we are, Manhattan! Can you handle it?
It makes sense to just let them be in love at the start of the season. Not that they weren't before, but we all saw these two went through it in season 2. But this time, we're starting things off, they're very clearly in love. Does that mean it's going to be all sunshine and flowers the whole time? Not necessarily. If you don't have some drama, where's the story? Where's the journey? Anyway, jumping over to episode 2 now, It Feels a Shame to Be Alive. There are 3 main plot threads to get into for this episode. The first is Sue going into labor and having her baby. When she was eating all that food and Emily came over and Sue said, "Do you want a muffin?" I had to stop and take a moment and write that line down. Where is that one Tom Hardy Mad Max meme? Can I find it? Editing me, where is it? We also have Sue doing a fake sip of tea that just bothered me. I know this is nitpicking. You don't have to point out that I'm nitpicking. I'm well aware. If you're really into the technical mechanics of filmmaking, this is pretty well known. But for those of you who aren't already familiar, when you are filming things, eating food or drinking beverages is something that your actors are not going to want to actually do because you're going to do take after take. So generally there will be a spit bucket for actors to spit things out in between takes. Another tactic is to have actors just push the food around the plate to make it look like you're eating, but you're not actually eating. Also, there's the option of just flat out pretending to eat or sip your food. What I would have expected to see in a moment like this, where Sue is supposed to be sipping out of her teacup, is that she would bring the cup to her lips and then the editor would strategically cut to the coverage of Emily. That's where, even if Sue's the one who is talking, you'll occasionally cut back to Emily to show that she's listening and that she's emoting to whatever it is that Sue is saying. Instead, you kept it on Sue, so she pressed the cup to her lips for about 1 second and then immediately put it down. That's not what sipping tea looks like. Can you tell I'm big on details? I also just drink a lot of tea, so that's not what sipping tea looks like. Moving on from that, going into labor, childbirth, all pretty straightforward, but since this is a satirical, anachronistic period piece, you have to do what? Poke fun at the outdated methodology. So Maggie suggested using chloroform. Do all of you know what that is? I'm not going to presume, and no judgment if you don't, especially since I know there are some people who watch these reviews who don't have English as their main language, so you might not have heard that word being used in just general conversational English. I would certainly hope not anyway. To put it in a context you may be more familiar with, if you've ever seen any kidnapping scenes in either a fictional film or a television series, there's probably been at least one where the kidnapper covers the nose of whomever they're kidnapping and mouth with a cloth, and that cloth is soaked in chloroform. Some have colloquially referred to it as the knockout drug. Don't do drugs, kids. Maybe an ibuprofen if it's your time of the month and you have really bad cramps, but stay far away from the chloroform. This is bad. Now I've said the word chloroform too many times, and I also Googled it when I was writing this review. I'm going to end up on a list now. Now on to the second point of discussion for this episode, which is the whole Austin and Jane storyline running its course. Before they even get into their relationship mess, they're hanging out with some of the secondary characters in the ensemble. And then we get the absolute nightmare fuel line, which I genuinely couldn't tell if it was intended to be feminist or satire. Sound off in the comments, let me know what you think. It's the line, "Why can't women be soldiers? How about some equality?" No! No! If there is one thing I'm exhausted of, it is the girl bossification of war crimes. If this is a new concept for you, let me attempt to condense it because there's a lot, but please don't hesitate to Google more about this, you know, study up on it. When I was much younger, I used to love watching the show Alias. It was my jam. And then I got older and I found out that during her run on the show, Jennifer Garner, whom I still really like by the way, she would do CIA recruitment videos. If you've never lived in the States, you might not be as familiar with the way that part of the military-industrial complex and the prison-industrial complex puts a lot of money into Hollywood to pump out propaganda that glamorizes the people who commit horrific crimes against people both in and out of the States. WikiLeaks also revealed that the CIA strategically weaponized feminism to manipulate people into supporting their horrific war crimes in the Middle East. I know I've said a lot about this, but I'm trying to effectively convey how horrific that line was for me to hear. If it was intended to be satirical, I don't think they went hard enough. They should have made it more blatantly ridiculous to ensure that the audience would know they're not supposed to agree with her and that you are in fact addressing the military-industrial complex. That needed to be something like what they often do with Mrs. Dickinson. She says the most absurd things, so you know that it's being satirical. She's given these ridiculous lines to convey how stifling the 1800s were to live in, especially if you were a woman. Like when she's talking about helping Sue with childbirth and she says, "I'll be using a lot of farm equipment." Also, while I'm already on my anti-war soapbox, when Sue says to Emily at the beginning of the episode, "Luckily words can't kill people," wrong! 100% wrong! When politicians lie to justify starting wars with other countries or on their own people, Lives are lost when certain women make false accusations against people like Emmett Till. Lives are lost. I get that the show is focusing first and foremost on Emily Dickinson, but if your whole gig is to be very plugged into the power of words, then maybe you should analyze the layers and deeper implications of the words you are putting into your scripts, is all I'm saying. Jumping back to Austin and Jane. They're breaking up, and I'm pretty sure none of the people watching this care one way or another. I don't say this to be disrespectful, I'm merely speculating. I'm reading the room. From a writing perspective, this makes sense. Austin already has so much drama from becoming a new father and his marriage being a mess, and all of the conflict he has going on with the rest of his family. Not to mention, this isn't even Austin's show, first and foremost. He's part of the ensemble, he's a main character. I guess for me, I just really wish the show had explained why this rift between him and his family formed. It feels like something happened between season 2 and season 3 that catalyzed this palpable tension between him and his father, but then we never got to see it, so I'm just left wondering why. Jane is leaving Amherst because she has gotten engaged to a new man who is going to be moving them to Vietnam in the new blossoming era of the French occupation of Vietnam. Now, take a pause to process the historical horrors of French colonialism. Thankfully, the brave people of Vietnam have freed themselves from French occupation. But when Austin describes that whole situation of Jane's fiance being wrapped up in that part of world history, and he says it sounds super problematic, it's a massive understatement, obviously. I do hope that a show like Dickinson can catalyze more historical projects, whether in film or television. I didn't even know this until recently, but Ethan Hawke actually played John Brown in a Showtime series called The Good Lord Bird. I'm going to be adding that to my watch list. I'm very curious to see how they went about telling that story. And if you remember, they referenced John Brown quite a bit in season 2. And he is what? Iconic. Jumping ahead to the final point of discussion for episode 2, we have Emily meeting with Fraser, who has enlisted and will be heading off very soon. I have to say, I was so impressed by the way this exchange played out between them and how it related back to everything that has been done to build up to this. So they're having this dialogue where he's appreciating Emily for being honest and not peddling false happiness. He asks for a poem of hers to bring with him, and it was all very sweet, but then we get to this huge moment where he asks Emily about her poem, and he says, "Who did you write it for?" And she says, "I wrote it for nobody." I gasped when she said that. The only thing I could think was, how dare you, Elena? Because it was so good. It really made me wonder, when this idea was formed, what were the sequence of events? Because you would have presumably had to come up with this idea for Fraser, but then you also had to have the idea to stretch it out a lot, from the introduction and the establishing of the idea, and then you have to save the big reveal. And not only that, put the big reveal in the next season. I don't know if they always knew that they would even get a season 3 to finish that arc, but it would have been such a shame if the show had not been successful enough and then the show had been prematurely canceled and then you would have had to leave that thread untied. I've been talking for a really long time now, so let's hurry up and get to episode 3, The Soul Has Bandaged Moments. Mr. Dickinson has recovered from his heart attack, but the experience has understandably impacted him. He's more cognizant of his mortality, which incentivizes him to put his affairs in order. This is the sort of thing that makes sense in the context of both his seasonal arc and his arc across the entire series. Now imagine if they had put that same consistency in for Austin. Would have been nice. I was very excited when Sojourner Truth showed up. I was not expecting to see her, but she was iconic. The dress was everything. Also, I love the joke they made about her being one age, but then looking significantly younger than that age. See, you might be thinking, why would you cast an actress that is so much younger than the supposed character age? Women feel enough pressure as is to look a certain way. Let me just remind all of you that Angela Bassett is 63 years old, and she looks better than all of us will ever look at any point in our entire lives. Some people are just privileged like that. Most of what I have to say about episode 3 is related to Emily's material or the things that other characters do that directly impacts her. So before I get into any of that, I want to highlight and address a couple of miscellaneous things. That line about Jane bringing maple syrup to a Vietnamese restaurant and making other people put it on their dumplings, and the show saying she is so canceled. Oh no, baby, we are far past canceled. What she did is a crime. Jail. The line, nothing says free domestic labor like adopted cousins, is very funny, but also unfortunately still very timely. The US government is siding with corporations so that they can legally hire children to work more, because the most capitalist country in the world would rather bring back child labor instead of standardized fair living wages and working conditions for everyone. I hate it. Let's jump on over to Emily. Did anyone else question the either intentional or unintentional meta reference of Emily saying his name is Bumblebee? I want to hear your theories. Was that just a happy coincidence? Or was that a wink wink, nod nod moment? When I hear a line like that, I immediately envision the trajectory of fans who know how to do graphic design and Photoshop, creating crossover edits between Dickinson and Bumblebee because of that line. Next up, Uncle Emily. Let me say that one more time. Uncle Emily. Why is that the most unexpectedly wholesome thing I've heard on this show? I was not expecting it. I was not prepared for it. But am I ready to welcome Uncle Emily to the family cookout? Ooh, I sure am. As cute and wholesome as it was to see Emily interacting with the new, still unnamed baby, I have to ask the audience, how do we feel about this disagreement that Emily and Sue have in this episode? I'll be honest here. My initial reaction was to get defensive on Emily's behalf because Sue was bringing out all these lines about I would like to feel chosen, and I'm just sitting here going, what exactly did she say to make you think you weren't being chosen? Emily Dickinson has people hitting on her and proposing to her left and right, and she just keeps staying single, something that isn't the easiest thing for her to do as a woman in the 1800s. And why is she still single? Because she loves you. Since when is Emily Dickinson the bad guy? This is not Shadow and Bone, okay? She's not your villain. We're not doing any of that. Why are we here? She's trying to play peacemaker while everyone around her is being ridiculous. She didn't even try to force Sue's hand. She just came over to check on her and see if there was any way to make peace. Emily is not denying that her mother is a whole lot of a whole lot. And I'm not saying that Sue's feelings are invalid either. Of course, you want to feel like your partner loves you and has your back. But what exactly does she expect Emily to do here? See, Emily didn't even say anything aggressive, and she didn't get demanding about trying to get Sue to let Mrs. Dickinson see the baby. She came over, she let Sue explain her stance on the matter, and that was that. I'm open to hearing what the viewers think, but right now, at the time of me recording this review, I'm team Emily Dickinson did nothing wrong and everyone needs to just chill out and let her write her poems. One final note about this episode. Can we please give a shout out to George for being the only person to hype up Emily's poems in this episode? He said he would pick her poems over her, and you all were able to see how she just lit up by that. The editors instantly pushed in this musical cue to indicate how that compliment makes her feel warm and happy and validated as an artist. And I know George is a mess, but he had her back just like Fraser had her back last episode. Maybe some of these men can stay is all I'm saying. Also, George handled Emily's rejection a hell of a lot better than he did in season 1. We all know what that is, right? That's character growth, and I'm here for it. Seeing as how this review script is already over 7 pages long, I'm just going to cut things there. Really good premiere, lots of drama and goodies, but still so much more to come this season. I know I did not get to every little detail about all 3 of these episodes, so if there's anything else that I didn't get to that you want to talk about, by all means, sound off below in the comments. I try to respond to comments when I'm posting new videos. Also, if you're watching this right when this goes up, just sit tight for a little bit longer and I will be posting my spoiler-free review of next week's episode, episode 4. It should be going up any minute now. So thank you so much for watching and let's have fun with this final season. Try not to fight too much, okay? We're all here to have a good time. I'll see you in the next one. Bye. Would you like to say hello to the people? Why is it that you were sleeping and then as soon as I started filming, you decided it was time to play?